So hello again to everybody that's here. Thank you for joining. I'm going to be your moderator today. My name's Jasmine Schmank, and just a few thoughts before we begin our presentation. So if you have any questions or feedback for your presenter, feel free to utilize the chat and it'll be shared at a convenient time. If you need anything specific during the session, feel free to send me a direct message and I'll try to get that handled for you. All right, we will turn it over to our presenter.
Good morning. Thank you, Jasmine. My name is Kristin Stanfill, and I am an English teacher at Springfield High School. This is my 12th year. I teach primarily juniors and sophomores, and I teach everything from inclusion classes with special education to our honors classes for sophomores and juniors. And then our more traditional English classes. I also started and taught for a while the creative writing class, and then handed that over to a colleague. And I served as our department chair for a few years also. Today, I thought I would share my journey, shifting from a more traditional approach to teaching English to shifting to what is now, I think, a more student centered approach. So I feel like I wanted to start my presentation with why should we consider making this shift? In part because I like to start with why with my students, but also because if you don't buy into the why, then the what and the how don't really matter. So for me, I decided to make the shift where students were choosing more of the reading. There was more flexibility in the types of writing that we would do, and just more experimentation in general, because I wanted our content to be exciting. I think it is, but kids don't always view it that way. And I think that making the shift helps it to be more exciting and more meaningful, as students are making and writing things that matter to them instead of simply things that I'm assigning or I think are important. They're reading things that mean something to them instead of what I have, as the teacher, have chosen. And they're practicing more genres and types of writing that they can expect to do in the real world and in their daily lives, whether they go on to be an English major or not. Um, and I began this journey before the pandemic, and it was not alone. Several teachers in my English department kind of explored this together, and Susan Muller, who was the chair at the time, kind of helped us get there. But I really took the leap into this kind of teaching, and I'll explain more what I mean by that when the pandemic hit, and I was like, okay, something has to change, because kids are no longer buying into the idea of school. So I linked an article. I doubt I'll be able to get through everything in my presentation, but the slides should be shared with you, and you will be able to go through and use all these links that I've used as like supplemental things. I just ask that you give credit for any ideas that I post here. And I didn't look to see who all joined, but if anyone from Springfield that teaches in the lower grade levels is on here, I just ask that you know, use the ideas for inspiration, but not use the same thing so that kids don't get to me and then they're like, what? But I wrote an article for the Ohio Journal of English Language Arts about like my first jump into this that I thought might be insightful if you're interested in doing this yourself. Um, so for me, like when I love to learn, and that's how I first started on this journey of like celebrating writing and reading instead of just assigning it, and watching kids fake read and just going through the motions. And for me, I don't know, people still call it Twitter in my circles, but Twitter and Instagram have been essential to that because I've been able to follow authors and like even post them questions my kids have wondered about as they're reading their books. I've followed writing projects like the Ohio Writing Project, and gotten writing ideas from there. I follow artists and musicians and museums and pop culture. Like I just use my Twitter and Instagram as a teacher account, but ultimately there's tons of ideas on their mentor texts that pop up that I'm constantly utilizing every day. So I can't emphasize enough how these can be professional learning communities for us. So these are the things we're going to cover today, hopefully, if we have the time. But for me, the first step in this whole process of starting to celebrate even more than I did before, student writing and reading, and moving more toward like a workshop model, it began with like learning myself. So for my journey, like new ideas forced me to experiment, which is what I'm asking my students to do. And I liked that. It also provides me motivation to keep finding new texts that my students can write, new mentor texts that we can mimic, new books that I could read and then recommend to my students for independent reading. This is not an exhaustive list of all the people and works that have inspired me, but I tried to pick specific ones that I felt really positioned me to be able to do this work. So I started by going to a conference with Kylie Beers and Robert Probst, and they really pushed the data around what was happening with reading in our country and what needed to happen and strategies for how to do that and how students can become um, better citizens and people just by reading, which I already believed, but like hearing their data really helped me to want to do something about it and some of their strategies. And then my district invited Ohio Writing Project in to do a couple of day PD at the end of the year. And they were using mentor text, which if you don't know what those are, it's the idea that you use a piece of writing to study it, look at the craft, and then to practice that and then create your own piece or pieces that are spin-offs of that. And we practiced that with OWP and they had us do a bunch of writing. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I want my English class to look like. And then I started doing some conferences and interacting with Julia Torres through email, who she is a school librarian. And then she's pivoted out into different things like We Need Diverse Books and the Educator Collaborative. And I discovered like so many titles that I was like, oh my gosh, my students would love these books. Now I want to build a classroom library. How do I do that? Which I'll explain a little of here. And then Shauna Coppola's book, or Coppola, I'm not sure how she pronounces it. I took a class through the Ohio Writing Project in Miami University that talked about broadening our definitions of reading and writing. That book is awesome and a short read that can totally shake up what you're doing. And then Goldie Muhammad just gave me a plan for how to plan units and to plan for student joy, which I think we're desperately in need of. Obviously, Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher played a huge role in that through their book love, their 180 days. If you haven't read those, I think they're essential. And eventually I was able to like have the bravery to like try these things in my own classroom. So what does that look like? The first like day or two of class, I always start with having students um, I use Padlet a lot. I'll have them anonymously define, okay, what is reading? What is writing? Don't look up answers just off the top of your head. How would you define these terms that teachers have been using with you for a long time? And inevitably, there's a lot of similar definitions about words on a page, reading words on a page, making meaning of words typed on a screen or on a page. Some kids might say like comprehending, things like that. And then I start pushing their ideas of what reading and writing are. And this concept came from Shauna's book. And I asked them, well, wait, hold on. What does it mean to read someone's body language? Like we use the verb read. How do you read someone's body language? And some kids will share ideas. And then I say, why do we use the word read with that? Does that count as reading? And then all of a sudden there starts to be like confusion. There starts to be like some debate over these terms that kids thought were pretty basic. And then I'll say, well, what does it mean to read the room? And we talk about that. And then we talk about like, can you read a picture? And some kids say no, and other kids are like, yes. And I'm like, well, how? And they start using words like, well, you have to make inferences about what's happening, and you have to like look at what the characters are doing. And then I start making the connections between like reading skills and what they're saying about pictures. And I share with them, I have a 9-year-old, and I say, like, we still read wordless picture books together. How do you read a wordless picture book? How do you write a wordless picture book? And we just keep going from there, and then I start asking them, "Well, what's the difference between writing and drawing? What are letters?" "Oh, originally they were drawings on a piece of paper." And all of a sudden it becomes far more complicated. And I try to get them to understand that ultimately reading and writing are so much bigger than what we've traditionally defined them as. And in my class, we are defining them as these broad things. Because ultimately, if you're creating a podcast where it's primarily audio, for example, and Coppola argues this in her book, you are essentially using almost all of the same skills other than actually putting words, alphabetic writing, those words on the page or screen. But you're still organizing, you're still planning for main ideas, you might still be crafting a thesis, you are still citing evidence, all of those things that we consider writing. So then we redefine. I put a couple of things on here. One of them is something I made this year because I feel like students in particular, the last 2 to 3 years after COVID, are struggling with why English class matters. Feel free to use this or a rendition of it if you would like. But I find that starting with like, why does any of this possibly matter to you in your life, and emphasizing that English and mastering communication and writing and reading give you power in all sorts of things. That can be useful for students. So I've tried to give you a lot of resources that you can, oops, sorry, I skipped ahead, that you can utilize in your own class or even just adapt. The why reading matters down below is a slideshow that I created when I wanted to start like, okay, I want to do independent reading, but now what? A lot of the books I brought in from my own personal library to start building my classroom library. I had colleagues donate books, students. I didn't like require this or anything, but some students wanted to donate books to the classroom library. Then, as a department, we started requesting some titles at the end of each year. Eventually, though, we were like, okay, we want to launch into this, and we just don't have enough books. And we do have a media center with books, and I worked with a media center specialist to try to collaborate because she also wanted more books, and I believe that we should have both a library and a classroom library. So we kind of tag teamed and went to our administration. I showed them this slideshow of why reading matters. And I just cited all the data from Kylene Beers and Robert Probst. I cited things from Penny Kittle and what she said it does. Um, and we looked at, okay, how many books do we have in our school? What's the average age of the book, et cetera. And we ended up getting some grants to purchase lots of books to then disperse to our English department. Um, I found that you have to make it a priority, and you have to convince people that it's a priority. So then my goal in the first 1 to 2 weeks is to just generate like a buzz about reading. So I give lots of book talks the first couple days about books that I know are like books that I've loved, books that other students have loved, books that are high interest, books that are not too dry or challenging, and get kids hooked on the idea of reading. And maybe books aren't what they thought they would be. And then in terms of writing, my goal is to just get them out of their comfort zone with writing and taking risks. So one day I might show them a video clip and be like, okay, writer's notebook, you are going to like continue the scene in your notebook, or you can write a free write about what you would like. The next day, I might show them a poem. We might read it, not analyze it, but just read it and pick a line to write about a memory that it brings up for you, etc. Then the next day, I might give them a cartoon, and they have to write from one of the point of views of the character. The next day I might give them a graph or chart to interpret and then like write things about, but ultimately they're doing different kinds of responding to mentor texts. And then I start explaining what a mentor text is and going through the craft moves. Um, and then I challenge them to like start writing with not just words on a page, but with images and audio and visuals and that kind of thing. And I've tried to break it down like, okay, how exactly do I generate excitement for reading? It starts with book talks, which Penny Kittle is huge about. If you want to read more about that, I'd be happy to recommend any more resources, titles, etc. If you want to reach out to me. And essentially, I have books in my classroom library. I have had other adults in our building and in our district come and give book talks, like quick 30-second. I'll read a little excerpt. I'll tell them what I loved about the book and give them something that leaves them wanting to find out more. And I always show a picture of the authors so that they can see like the diverse group of authors that I'm recommending, the diverse books, and then they can go back to that. I just put it on a slide. They can go back to it and like see all the titles that I've recommended over the course of the we're on trimesters. Um and one of the things that I loved about bringing other adults in is that it's not just English teachers reading. The art teacher, Mr. Abel, came in and gave book talks about fantasy is not my strength. He gave book talks about fantasy books. And then our assistant superintendent came in and gave a book talk about a book she loved. And then our athletic director came in and he recommended a Moneyball, a book about sports. And it was just a broader variety because they were hearing from more than just me, but they're also seeing all these adults that are reading actively in their lives. And then I have kids that either ask to do it or once we get rolling into the trimester, I'll send out a Google form that says, hey, who's interested in giving a book talk and what book would you like to talk about? And inevitably, there's kids who want to do that. And even former students, we have like an AEI period. Sometimes I'll have them come in or maybe record a book talk and then play it for the class. Um, and then I do speed dating, which is like not my idea. It's all over the internet right now, but pulling from all my different classroom library books, giving kids a pile, I put them in groups. There's been times I've had them fill out something on paper, fill out something on a Google form, fill out something like a worksheet. And really, the only goal is to get them to open a book. And I teach them the process of, okay, this is a book jacket. Like when I'm reading, trying to find a book to read, I read the first page and see if I like the sound of the book. And I look for, okay, what awards, what other books has the author written? And just teach them how to interact with books because a lot of them don't. Um, and then I purposefully give them ideas like, okay, pick up a book you would not normally gravitate to. And then they're looking at books that maybe they wouldn't pick up and they're learning what they like and what they don't like or getting surprised about their misconceptions. Um, and they're starting to talk to each other about books. And we do several rounds of that. I also have created scavenger hunts where it's like, okay, find a book that surprises you. Find a book that isn't one you would want to pick up. Find a book that you just love the cover. And it just gets them picking up more books and interacting. I also take them to the media center where beforehand I will pull a cart of books that I love that our media center has. And then I book talk some of those. The librarian book talks some of those, gives a tour of where the different genres can be found. And then they have to add more books to their what to read next list so that students are always having more books to pull from as they finish books. And then just something little, but it generates a lot of conversation is just asking students for their favorite books, both from the past to now. I mean, I've got some kids that are like, "Oh, Percy Jackson." Like, okay, let's put it on the board. Like maybe you never read Percy Jackson as a kid and you want to go back and read it. I support that. And I also support audiobooks, ebooks, graphic novels. Like those are all reading. They all count. So students will go over and look at this board, or say, I just had this last trimester, I hadn't updated it in probably a year. And students were like, oh my gosh, can we like spend part of a class period redoing the board? And I'm like, sure, let's make it happen. Like it was their idea. Um, I put a link to the Book Love Foundation because they do fund, if you apply and fill out things, it's associated with Penny Kittle, but they do fund classroom libraries if they're looking for a way to like maybe start this. Um, and then I put a link here to the book talk slides, which are just like I was saying, the picture of the author and the picture of the book that I project every time I give a book talk. I show them the physical book, to show them like how long it is. And oh, this one actually has pictures. What? I wasn't expecting that, right? Or this one's written in verse. See how there's like, it's like poetry, but it reads like a novel. And it might look like it's long, but actually, there's not that many words on a page, and it helps them realize that maybe it's not as intimidating as they might have thought. Um, we spend time like making Goodreads accounts, and I show them how I use mine, and they input books they've liked over the course of the trimester, and I show them how you can make a goal for the year and then like mark off your progress in the book and everything. And I think that this just encourages kids to continue to have a reading life outside of my own like recommendations and like my class. And I encourage kids to read outside of class. I tell them the goal is to read for 2 to 3 hours outside of class. It's a goal. Sometimes we meet it, sometimes we don't. And when you find the right book, you find yourself making extra time to read. And I don't want to make this sound like it's easy. It is not. I've had students who like, I've given them 10 different books. They don't like it. They're trying to stall. They don't want to read. They're avoiding. But you just can't give up. You've got to keep circling back. And eventually, it might take me 8 weeks to get through to a kid and find a book that they actually like. And then they start reading. And then they come to me like, Mrs. Stanfill, I didn't know books could be like this. What else can I read that's like this? I had a kid who didn't read. I won't name the kid, but he didn't read for 10 weeks, and he had been in trouble with the law. He had never been a reader, never liked school. And I finally found a book that he liked, and he read it, and he ended up reading 3 books in 5 weeks. And he couldn't believe it. Honestly, I was surprised, but at the same time, like it's an example of I've got to know enough books to recommend. I have to be a matchmaker between kids and books. And it's pushed me to read more, even though I've always loved reading, but like I'm reading all the time now so that I can recommend to kids. And it's exciting. And then I'm also, as I'm reading, looking for mentor texts. Like, this is a cool paragraph about like developing setting. Bam. I take a picture of it, throw it on a Padlet, and I can use it later when I need to teach kids how to create a setting. But ultimately, like I don't do a lot of assessing of their reading. We're reading for enjoyment. We do other small like whole class readings, whether that be poetry, plays, excerpts, etc., where we dig in and analyze and that kind of thing. But for independent reading, it's just mostly informal conversations. Some of the best teaching I've done about reading and hooking kids in is at the bookshelf when they're looking for a book and they don't know what the different genres are, and I teach them that. Or maybe they've never heard of a graphic novel and I show them and they're excited, or they tell me what they don't like, and then I try to narrow down a few authors they might like. I put a link here to a form that I created. When my students are reading, I conference with kids most days. Some days, stuff comes up and I have to do something else. But for the most part, I conference with students and I just make a binder. I print off a bunch of these papers that I created, and I basically chat with kids about, okay, what are you reading right now? What do you think about it? Oh, you hate it? Like, ooh, do we want to change books? What do you hate about it? Well, how have you given it enough chance? Well, what's enough chance? Well, have you read like at least like 30, 40 pages? Or are you just reading 2 pages and deciding it's not good? Because some good books, you got to stick with it until it really starts building. And I just keep all these notes about kids in my binder, and then I go through and continue to add to it. You're welcome to use this. I also linked to some questions that Penny Kittle recommends using during reading conferences to kind of nudge our readers. And when you're at different points, like if a kid's finishing a book, these are the kind of questions you could ask. Um, but then how else do I generate excitement for reading? It also has to do with writing. So sometimes we'll just do a quick write about our independent reading book and then share out. Sometimes I'll say, okay, I do a question of the day with the students as like a low stakes attendance question. Sometimes I'll say, throw a picture of your independent reading book on there and what you like about it so far. Or give us some information about your author and put their picture. And that generates conversations. Or we just studied The Signpost by Colleen Beers. I want you to find an example of contrast and contradiction in your independent reading book. Pick out a line you love. Let's go around the room and share lines that you love from your independent reading. And that generates like, what is that line about? And we do turn and talks. They might finish their 10 minutes of reading and I say, okay, I would like you to turn and chat with someone near you about what's going on in your book. Don't give too many like details where you spoil the plot. I also have done book clubs where I personally let the kids choose their own groups because I find they're more willing to talk to each other. And I found that 4 to 5 kids in a group is the best. And I have done where usually I'll give a list of titles. They might be thematically related, but I try to have variety on there. And then sometimes I get the books from the library. Sometimes the kids get the books. Sometimes I help them find ebooks or audiobooks. Our department did invest one year in buying like 10 or 12 titles, like 10 copies of each title to use for book clubs. And then they come up with their own reading calendar. I've had it where some groups read the same book, all 4 kids. I've had other groups choose where 2 kids read this title, 2 kids read that title, and then they like talk about them and consider the ways that the author creates the work and the themes that emerge and the similarities. And then once a week, we have discussions and I'll go around and take notes. They have to do journals that they turn in. And ultimately, they get a grade for the book club experience, but it's based on the quality of their discussions, the quality of their journals, and then that kind of thing. And ultimately, I try not to attach too much to independent reading, but these are some ideas of things that you can do with it in order to like encourage students to engage. The one pager, usually students really like that. I let them pick a book that they've read this trimester and just like create it on the page. And I give them certain things like signposts and theme and stuff like that that has to appear on there. The final portfolio, students pick some of their writing and also write a reflection about how they've changed and grown as a reader, what they've learned about themselves as a reader. Now, writer's notebook. I have done like actual notebooks that students write in. Some teachers at my school still do that. I've also done digital when we switched to the pandemic, where I use a slide deck and that's their notebook. And I always have access to it. Personally, I've stayed with the digital notebook because they don't forget it. They can't lose it. I can access it at home without carrying a bunch of notebooks or during my planning, anywhere, anytime. I don't read everything that my students write, and I tell them that. I put it in my syllabus, and I also explain to parents that they and their students are responsible for determining what books are appropriate for their kid to read and that they should be getting permission from their parent before they choose a book. And I have parents sign off that yes, they're okay with that, or no, they're not. And in about 5 years of doing this, I've never had a parent say they weren't okay with making sure of that, and I've never had an issue. But ultimately, my goal with Writer's Notebook is short, low stakes practice. I never grade it, although you could do a completion grade if you want. And I have a writing conference form where I conference with kids sometimes. A lot of times I write with them, and I'm just always looking for mentor texts and provocations that I could use. And ultimately, you've got to teach the kids how to share. We've done writers groups where once a week they share like their favorite piece of writing they've created. And they talk about the struggles of like what's difficult for you as a writer. What do you struggle with when it comes to revision? And they just share their ideas, and I model for them what it looks like to share and what it looks like to accept someone's writing, and that this isn't a place to be critical. I applied for a grant through the Springfield Schools Foundations and received it, where I just asked for a bunch of different like writing games and supplies that could spark ideas for quick writes and writing practice. I linked each one here. I just used Amazon because I figured it was the easiest to link. And you can see like some of them are like argumentative games where kids can practice like rhetoric skills and things like that. Some of them, like this man bites dog headline, it gives you a bunch of words that they shuffle into headlines, and we practice headline writing. And then we pick one of the headlines to write the actual news story for as like a little quick write. And it's always funny and kids want to share. Um, I have used like I just buy tons of different postcards. Some are with art, some are with nature, and then I just have them all over all the desks in my classroom, and kids pick a postcard and write for 4 minutes about that. They could write from point of view of something in the picture. They could write something that they think led to the event. They could use it as the setting, etc. I did post this, which I think could be really helpful if you want to start doing some of this. This genres sheet I got from Beth Reimer at Ohio Writing Project, and it is essential in my classroom. It's a 2-page document, and it just lists all different genres of writing. And I post this on my classroom, and we do what's called sacred making. So once every couple of weeks, I'll give 20-minute chunks where kids can choose what they write and create. They can make anything during that time. You just have to be writing or creating. And the reason I keep saying creating is because they can create something audio, they can create something visual. So if you look at this, it gives tons of ideas. And I tell kids sometimes, you know what? Try creating bumper stickers. You're in drama club. If drama club made a bumper sticker, what would it say and look like? You want to try your hand at writing fortune cookie inserts. They seem easy, but they are more difficult than you think. Or I tell them, okay, what's an obituary? We talk about that. And then I love interior decorating. So I playfully wrote in front of them an obituary for like everything matching, like matchy design style needs to die. I've had some kids make like a wanted poster for like balancing equations in chemistry, and like that they wanted it to be found dead. Like it can be playful, and kids have fun with this. This is when 20 minutes, kids plan a podcast with a couple classmates. And then the next time we do sacred making, they go and record it. And I had a group last year that made about 4 or 5 podcast episodes. And then after class ended, they kept going. They made it the whole year. They started interviewing teachers. They emailed UT's communications department for advice. And like now the kid wants to go into broadcast journalism, which I think is a pretty cool connection. So all these are different games that you can use, and I'm constantly gathering stuff on social media as well. So basically, quick writes, I give 30 seconds to 10 minutes to create or write to something that I give them to spark some ideas. For sacred making, when they're choosing what they want to write or create, and I'm giving them essentially free reign, I give 20 to 30 minutes. It's enough time to create something, but it's not too much time to like do nothing and start screwing around. And I do that periodically over the trimester, and they can create new things or they can keep adding to what they've already started. And then my reading conferences, I try to keep to 3 to 4 minutes. per kid during the 10 minutes of silent reading that are happening at the beginning of every class. So then what am I grading my students on? We do all sorts of assignments. I cannot go through all these right now, but I think if you explore them, you'll find it interesting. But I was looking at Sports Illustrated for Kids magazines with my son, and I realized, ooh, we could do an assignment like this. My goal was to practice concise writing. We did a bunch of exercises to do that, and clarity in writing, and to get them to compose multimodally for different purposes. So I just took screenshots of some of the electronic copies we were reading on Libby of these magazines, and the different kinds of articles that they featured. And then my students created their own version. So I saw, like, okay, they did an athlete profile on a gymnast. What does it look like? There's not tons of words. Okay. It gives us some pictures, and then it gives us some like need to know information, and then like a paragraph that captures that person. I let kids choose what they wanted to create. One girl made a profile about her mom, who was an ICU nurse, and she put pictures and talked about the number of surgeries her mom has helped with. It was really cool. Or I said, if you don't like that idea, you could do like a freeze frame idea where it gives us this kind of article. It gives us one major picture, and it's more about a moment instead of a profile of someone. And I show them all these mentor texts, we study them, and then they came up with their own ideas. So this one's about a guy who was trying to hold his shoe and the basketball because his shoe had come off. They might not have that moment they could capture, but what's a sports moment you could do a freeze frame of and then capture in writing? And I did that with my honors English students, and they had really creative and fun projects, and it forced them to be concise and clear because there's not a lot of space to write. So that's like one example. I'm going to move to some other things, and if I have time, I can come back here. But I've had kids write listicles. They've done creation myths, Native American creation myths with images and words. They've done how-to guides. Some of them were video-based. Some of them were more like actual directions written out, infographics, etc. And then how do we celebrate all this work that our students are doing? I've had kids write letters to the editor, and we have a radio station at Springfield. It's one of our classes, and they worked with the radio students and had their letters. They got to read them on the air of our radio station. I've done a newsletter before where I feature like 4 or 5 really cool pieces of writing from students in the last week. Um, there's Scholastic Arts and Writing Awards that kids have submitted to, and we've had kids at our school submit and go on to the regionals and be featured in museums. And I put a link to that. We've created a class Wakelet where, or you could do this on Padlet, where everyone submits like their favorite piece of writing that week, and we share out that way. And I've created a bulletin board where I just throw different things up, or we'll do a gallery walk. Sometimes they'll just publish, what's one line you wrote in your quick write today that you love? Boom. And we throw it up there. And then if they want to elaborate, they can. If not, that's okay. The cafeteria TV, we have this in our cafeteria that features like sporting events and birthdays and stuff. And my goal, I haven't done this yet, but my goal is to get like cool projects being projected up there too. And in terms of reading, periodically I'll ask kids, how many books have you read? And then project a chart to see like, wow, this is how many books we've read in our class. And it encourages those who maybe haven't read as much to be like, whoa, look at what other people are doing. They are able to, like, some teachers do this, I don't, but some teachers will put every kid's name just like in elementary school, and you put a sticker up there each time you finish a book, and you can start to see how many classmates have finished books. One thing that I want to show you that I think I skipped over that I linked here is this quick writes in sacred making. I wanted to give like very tangible ideas of, okay, I like this idea of doing a writer's notebook and quick writes and sacred making, but like, where do I start? And I put like, this is where I come up with ideas for my quick writes and sacred making. I listed titles of books that I use to pull information from. And ultimately, I also put examples of like, okay, I say I find stuff on social media, like what, right? So I put some examples that you could use in your classroom tomorrow if you want. Not tomorrow, tomorrow's the weekend, but Monday if the weather cooperates. But like this one I just saw, I'm going to use with my class probably next week. So one of the artists and writers I follow on social media and an Ohio Writing Project posted, I want to be like coffee, strong but not bitter, full of energy but not annoying, hot but not intimidating, beloved. I could show that. I can make my own example where I come up with what I want to be like, and then kids have to come up with that. And it's multimodal because we've got pictures, we've got words, and it's making them think, self-reflect as well. I know we're coming up on close to time. I just want to show a couple more things. I made this where I have students do like a virtual tour, and I tried to put a variety of things. I linked to like some of our national parks. I linked to some of our museums, both local and like international. I linked to different science things, the art museums, etc. And they explore for a little bit, and then we write something inspired by something that we viewed today during the writing tour. There's also Right Across America and the National Writing Project. They have an app, National Writing Project app. You can get tons of ideas on there. You can participate in writing marathons, which I do all the time virtually. Um, Another thing that I thought was pretty interesting, I made a story map with my like our area, our state, Ohio, but kids could make their own of this. And I listed out like my rationale for it. But the thing that I liked is that you can customize this. You could make one for your students, or they could make one for themselves as part of their sacred making. But ultimately, you use a map and you pick certain points on a map, and then you can add pictures, you can add writing prompts. So, this is through the Night Lab. And again, this is all linked on some of the documents that you have. But I picked certain points in our state and then came up with writing prompts. So then kids can cycle through Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And I put a link to it. I explained what the park was, and then I gave invitations to write. Now, this was not a fully original idea, even though I created this. This is how the Ohio Writing Project and National Writing Project marathons are set up. And then I gave all these invitations to write, and kids could explore this. And then, oh, the Toledo Zoo, and then invitations to write. Memories you have at the zoo. What do you think about that? Write argumentatively about whether or not zoos are moral. Maybe you write about climate change, pollution, and like animals being impacted by human behavior. Um, so I tried to give you some pretty concrete things that you could go through. But if you have any questions, I'm going to put my email in the chat because I realized I forgot to put it on the slides, I think. So let me throw that on there real quick.
I have a
And I
question for you
know,
from
yeah,
she said, these are great ideas. How does Kristin modify these lessons to fit her inclusive classrooms? I am a structured support teacher at the junior high level, and I did attend the Kittle Gallagher PD this summer as well.
yeah. So my inclusion class is a few things, I would say. The quick writes, I don't end up modifying very much, and it's kind of surprising how students, for the most part, dive in. The only thing I find myself doing sometimes is just prompting them to get started, or I might go around with the intervention specialist and like throw like just chat for a minute about possible ideas. But even my students who struggle with writing, they like the freedom for the most part of being able to write, and there's enough of an idea to spark so that they don't have nothing to write about. Don't have anything to write about. But in terms of some of these assignments, like for example, my juniors, it is an inclusion class right now. They are going to do a rhetoric project where they're going to research a topic of their choice, and then they have to figure out an argument, an audience that needs to hear the argument, and what product could they make that best reaches that audience. So I might have some kids, they want to research whether or not LeBron is the greatest of all time. They're like, okay, who's my audience? NBA fans. Okay, how could you best reach them? I think I'm going to do a podcast. I give graphic organizers. Sometimes, if a kid's paralyzed by choice, I might limit the choices or make a choice for them if they want me to. Um, the graphic organizers guides them through the process. Depending on the kid, like if I know they struggle to articulate orally, then I might say, we might avoid making a podcast. What if instead you did this? And I try to lean into their strengths. And I find that giving them these broad options allows them to play to their strengths in a way that having one assignment that must look like this doesn't. So for example, the kid that made the podcast, another kid at the same time might be researching climate change, and they might decide that making an infographic would be the best approach. And then another student is like, I'm tired of our board of education and our dress code. And I'm like, all right, preach. Like, how are you going to target them? Maybe a letter to the superintendent would be the best way, and the board of education would be the best product for you to create. And either way, when they have choice and they have voice about that choice, their motivation goes way up, and kids are willing to create things that they would not create otherwise. Even if their skills are a little bit of a deficit, they push themselves for the most part to work around that. I hope that answers that question, but I'm definitely willing to like talk a lot more in depth, like through email or things like that. And I also could show examples of some student work. That was one thing I feel like I didn't get to do, but there just wasn't enough time to show you the kind of things that even my special education students have created.
Looks like you got a thumbs up from Amanda. Sounds like you
Yeah,
answered the
that was
question
awesome.
pretty well.
Thank you.
So that's all we have time for today, you all. Thank you so much for joining, and great job, Kristin.
Thank you.
You'll want to leave this current room and return to the main room. So those are the instructions I was given to give you all. Thank you for joining, and see you around.
Thank you.
Absolutely.